The Alex Orji experience will continue until morale improves, and he is going to get his second start on Saturday with the Minnesota Golden Gophers coming to the Big House. It's one of the remaining games where Michigan can afford to have a little bit of leeway, but not too much. And we'll get into what Michigan needs to do, what it will be going up against, and all of that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. No Trente Jones today because I didn't reach out to him this morning because he was on the Gulf Coast in Florida. Kind of on the fringe of where things were going to be. So I'm just going to let him get sorted and be safe and all of that stuff. So we will go solo today and hopefully have him back next week previewing Washington. But nonetheless, this upcoming here is I think the second most winnable game left on the schedule, which is kind of terrifying when you think of it. It's a home game against a bad Minnesota team that's 2-2. Minnesota lost to North Carolina in the season opener, and North Carolina is not really any good right now. They beat Rhode Island, an FCS team. They beat Nevada, who is a 2-3 program right now. They played in week 0. The only teams that they've beat are Troy, which is usually a pretty good team, and Eastern Washington, another FCS team, but they'd lost to every team with a pulse. SMU, Georgia Southern, Minnesota. So we're going to kind of get into what Minnesota presents and what Michigan needs to do against Minnesota. I mean, it's pretty clear what Michigan needs to do offensively against Minnesota. Kind of the same thing it did last week, although you hope that they can figure out some things in the passing game. But I want to alert you not to feel like if they don't get things going in the passing game, that's a sign of trouble. One reason why is because thus far, no one has done anything through the air against Minnesota. This is the number 2 pass defense in the country. They've not given up more than 117 yards through the air yet this year. And that number went to Rhode Island, of all teams, in a 48-0 loss. Even North Carolina, which was breaking in a new quarterback and all of that, North Carolina even had just 105 passing yards. Unsurprisingly, Iowa had only 62 passing yards, but Iowa also had 272 yards on the ground. So don't be surprised if those numbers look similar. You just got to, I saw something, I can't even remember what it was from, a preview somewhere. It said, don't be surprised if Minnesota and some of these other teams try to take a page out of what USC did in the second half, like that blueprint. That it's not really like a tough blueprint to follow. It's called putting extra men in the box and daring you to throw. And Michigan still said, we're not doing that. So I'm sure that Minnesota recognized that, hey, Iowa is going to run every play, and they still couldn't stop it. So, to me, that's just funny. I want to look at and see what Iowa did exactly here in terms of the ratio. I don't know if I can. I don't know if it will show me exactly. Actually, here's how we can do it. Game log. Against Minnesota, they did attempt 19 passes. They completed 11 for 62 yards, so an average of 3.3. That's, you know what? Alex Orji is fully capable of doing exactly that. I do think he is being somewhat underrated. I do think that, we haven't seen the downfield passing, but at the same time, that's also like what receivers do you have that are go-to? I think if you had like a Nico Collins on this team, it might be a little bit different. But you don't. You've got a Colston Loveland who wasn't even in last week. So if he's back, then, and I have no understanding of whether or not he will play. But I think that changes a little bit of the calculus of being able to go downfield. But running against this defense at this moment is kind of your best bet because not every team has had success. North Carolina had 147 yards against them on the ground. They managed to beat Minnesota with just 252 yards of total offense, right? And then the only team to get over 100 after that was Iowa with the 272. So that's just kind of how you have to attack them, is through the ground game, which, of course, that's how they want to try to win as well. It hasn't always worked out that way. They've only had 2 games over 100, and it's been in their 2 easiest games. 116 yards rushing against Rhode Island, 195 against Nevada, but they only managed 79 yards rushing and 79 yards rushing as well, and against North Carolina and Iowa. So Michigan theoretically should be able to hold them under as far as that's concerned. They can sometimes pass the ball with Max Brosmer at the helm. Hasn't been pretty. 165 yards passing against North Carolina, 306 against Rhode Island, 191 against 191 against Nevada, and 209 against Iowa. And when you look at the rushing numbers, they were a lot better in some of these other games. And it's kind of funny because we look at the last year and say, and one of the things we asked Wink Martindale was, did you look at last year against Minnesota? Because they were able to run the ball pretty well against Michigan. And they did, compared to what teams do against Michigan, 117 yards rushing. But when you consider what success running the football tends to look like, that's not what they were able to do. They've got a couple guys that can run the ball well. Darius Taylor, who's their bell cow, Marcus Major. They always seem to find something as far as that goes. And then you got Jaron Mangum, who is the brother of Jaden Mangum. Both transferred away from Michigan State. The Mangum family hates the Spartans now. So there is that, but they don't have some of those players that you really love. Now, they do get a lot of interceptions. They've gotten 7 through 4 games. Kerry Brown, freshman defensive back, is the guy who's got 2 there. Jack Henderson, a senior defensive back, has a pick 6. And then there's just a bunch of other guys. But at the same time, they don't necessarily have a ton going for them on either side of the ball. Defensively, obviously, they're much stouter. Pass defense, they're definitely very good. They're not obviously great at stopping the run, because anytime you let a team run for 272, you're not in a good space up front. So Michigan should have some opportunities there, no matter what they try to do. Let's continue talking about this game and where this game needs to go, and let's do that here in just a moment. But first, with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5 APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply for for product-specific disclosures. Visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, we're going to continue on here in just a moment, but before we do, you might notice the shirt that I am wearing. Well, let me tell you, college football is well underway. You're going to need to gear up with clothes like these, and they're the coolest Michigan apparel you're going to find in the game. You heard me talking about it for years. You've seen me wearing it frequently. It seems like every Thursday I wear my hoodie, and that's the gear I get from Homefield. Homefield is a premium collegiate apparel company based out of Indianapolis, and there's no place I'd rather get my Michigan gear from. That's where I'd say a good 80-ish% is from. The other 20% is pretty much from Wolverine Boot Company, which they just started. I got some Wolverine stuff coming too. I got more Homefield stuff coming. It's all fun this time of year. With their retro modern style, Homefield scours every school's history to find those amazing, unique designs, and you're going to love them all. You're going to really stand out, especially at the tailgate. Let me tell you about some of the stuff that they have just launched. They've got these amazing heavyweight tees that they just launched last week. They're all the rage right now. They have the can't miss kickoff boxes where you can get a t-shirt. This shirt was part of that. You can get a long sleeve Every time I've worn the long sleeve out, I've had people asking where I've gotten it. A hoodie, and you can even do the one that has a hat, which is absolutely amazing and gorgeous looking. It's everything you need for the entire football season. Right now, this particular item I'm about to mention is sold out. I'm hoping that they come back and stock it. They have the coolest bomber jacket I've ever seen that celebrates the national championship win. If that comes back in stock, I'm all over it. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use my code GOBLUE24, get 15% off of your first order. That's homefieldapparel.com, promo code GOBLUE24 to get 15% off of your first order. Homefield Apparel, just the Coolidge college gear anywhere. All right, let's continue on here. Looking at what Minnesota does and what Michigan needs to do, and then we'll give the score prediction and everything there. They do have a couple receiving threats. They're not necessarily much different than what Michigan has in terms of like production. So Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer, they're two big receiving threats. Daniel Jackson has 21 catches for 268 yards. Elijah Spencer has 12 for 153. The big play guy there is Lameek Brockington. He's a junior. He's got 6 catches for 122 yards, averaging 20.33 yards per reception. They definitely go downfield. Their average receiving is 11, just over 11. By contrast, let's look at what Michigan's receiving. So it's theirs is definitely better. Colston Loveland still leads with 19 for 187. Michigan's downfield is 8.47, so they're able to get a little bit more vertical. Not a ton more, but a little bit more. It will certainly help if Michigan's able to get Loveland back and then maybe get some of those other guys that we've seen have big receptions, whether it be Peyton O'Leary, CJ Charleston, the tight ends. I mean, because they're going to go quick game more so with Samaj Morgan. I'd love to see Fred Moore get more involved. Really need to get something out of Tyler Morris. I know he missed a game, but 5 catches for 32 yards. Like, we expected a lot more from him. And get the running backs involved. I've seen Space Coyotes breakdown where he said like they're really not going to utilize the running backs in the pass game much, or at least not line them up at wide receiver based off of just kind of different things. I disagree that that's even like that they can't or won't. Just because we've seen it in recent years. I mean, Donovan Edwards in 2020, was it 2021, I guess, when he had the 170 yards, he wasn't necessarily lining up at receiver, but you kind of look at what you can do with the running backs in the pass game. These are the types of things that I think Michigan needs to do to open up the pass game. I'm not sure how susceptible Minnesota will be, but I'm assuming that they're going to really bunch up to the line. So if you can release the running back, still have the threat of running. I saw what Devin Gardner was talking about. I actually kind of watched a bit of his appearances on WTKA this week. When he talked about the same thing that we talked about, which is having that type of play where you have a wide receiver leak and then you fake the run with the quarterback, right? Like he takes a step towards the line and then a guy pops out, and usually everyone's going to kind of, all those linebackers are going to be sucked up. The safeties probably going to be sucked up, and you have an opportunity to hit someone. Just be creative if you're Michigan to get the pass game going. Now, you don't necessarily need a lot because we've seen with Minnesota, they don't allow a lot of passing yards. This is where I'm kind of curious about Sharon Moore's propensity and his hubris, because what has Jim Harbaugh long done? Well, you would go into a game and you'd say, Nebraska stops the run. They're much more adept against the pass. And it seemed like every time you look at that, I'm thinking of last year, week 5, first road trip to Nebraska. And it was like, okay, you're not going to be able to run against these guys. Penn State in 2022, you're not going to be able to run against these guys. What does Michigan do? We're going to run against you. And it seems like a lot of times when they've gone up against higher end pass defenses, sometimes they try to pass. It's like Michigan tries to like destroy the thing that you're good at. I don't know if that's going to be what Sharon Moore decides to do, but I would not be surprised if he does. I think the good news for Michigan here in some ways is that you have a lot kind of going for you defensively, and I don't think that Minnesota is really going to challenge you too much. Max Brosmer isn't too far behind some of the leaders in the Big Ten, but he has 4 games where you look at some of the guys have 3. He is behind Miller Moss. He's averaging 209 yards a game overall. He's passing for 65%, but he has 5 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. That's a great opportunity because he will put the ball in harm's way to get after it if you're the Michigan defense. Like, this Minnesota offense is not really scaring anybody. So when you look at 2 of the teams Michigan's played, they had a fail and a pass against the 2 really high-flying offenses that they faced. So that does bode well for Michigan in a lot of ways. Not everyone has necessarily been on the schedule has been phenomenal, but I mean, even Fresno State hasn't been that bad. But at the same time, like you look at what Fresno State's done after they played Michigan, and what the Michigan defense held them to, 244 total yards. And then you look at the rest of the games, 513 against Sacramento State, whatever FCS school, 525 against New Mexico State, 345 against New Mexico. The lowest passing output, which felt bad if you're a Michigan fan, with 235. I mean, that's still their lowest passing output, and they've been able to run the ball a lot better. So Michigan's defense has been good about taking away the things that other teams are relatively good at. I do want to look at one more thing here. Arkansas State's the one exception because they were able to drive the field late, and they actually had a worse game against Iowa State last week. But otherwise, I mean, they were kind of held similar as far as rushing yards, the passing yards, second lowest Michigan allowed. So the defense is still, it's not necessarily in the full kind of Michigan experience yet, where it's like, well, that's the lowest that they've allowed from, or, you know, you look at other teams' total offense, and usually it used to be like, well, they had their worst game against Michigan. It's not necessarily that across the board. Arkansas State's a little bit of a paper tiger because they got a lot of their yards in garbage time, but as well as the 2 touchdowns that they managed. But nonetheless, there's Michigan's defense has done pretty well for the most part. I do want to look at one more, just out of my own morbid curiosity. This is not going to be a fun, pretty place to live here. Okay, yeah, it's actually Texas had their worst game so far against Michigan. They still had their way with Michigan, but they had the least amount of rushing yards and the least amount of passing yards that they have had thus far. I know it's different because it's a big game and it's Michigan, but nonetheless, the Michigan defense is at least kind of living up to its billing, and Minnesota can't really challenge that. So I expect Michigan's defense to come to play. I'm curious to see how much they try to get the passing game going, considering that's Minnesota's strength. But like I said, we've seen Michigan at times, at least under Jim Harbaugh, say, we're going to go right at the thing you're good at and we're going to break you. So it'll be interesting to see. All right, we're going to continue on here in just a moment. I'll give you my final score prediction, how I think this game's going to go, and all of that. We'll do that here in just a moment. But before we do, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view a live play-by-play, and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. You'll even get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, a couple minutes left here, keeping it nice and short on the preview Friday. Not really a lot to get into. I don't really love really getting into the nitty gritty of opponents that Michigan should beat. Now, Michigan could lose. The 2 teams with the pulse that Minnesota's faced, that's been relatively close against. They need a win here in the worst way, as to not go 2-3. Their backs are against the wall. They're being told that they can't do it. They're going up against mighty Michigan. I still just think that Michigan's fronts are, I think Minnesota's probably the second best fronts that they'll be facing behind Texas, but I don't think that they have any of the stuff that kind of goes along with it. I am curious to see how Michigan handles Minnesota's always usually had a pretty good offensive line. I can't look up what I want to look up here on this page. So let's look real quick. When it comes to sacks allowed, Minnesota has allowed 8 thus far in 4 games. So an average of 2 a game. That's right, kind of like in Michigan's wheelhouse. And not terribly dissimilar from where Michigan is. Michigan's allowed 6. So, Michigan's a little bit better about getting into the backfield and all of that. In terms of actually getting after the quarterback, they have 8 as well. So they are kind of okay at it, That's basically it. Not that Michigan's been absolutely incredible in terms of getting to the quarterback. In terms of sacks, they're 48th, and they have exactly 8 themselves, averaging 2 a game. So when you look at what teams usually get versus what they allow, they're kind of both in the same kind of area. But they haven't seen a pass rush like this before. So Michigan's really I'd like to see Michigan dial some things up and really show like, we're better than we were earlier in the season and we can get home, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to be, Miami's just destroying everybody with 16 sacks through 4 games. Even Michigan State's got 15 through 4 games. But you've got to try to figure out a way to get home to the quarterback, force them into long situations, make them one-dimensional. Meanwhile, Michigan's probably going to be one-dimensional anyway, no matter how you put it. I think that this could be an interesting game if Michigan decides to, work in some different screens and, short game, as far as it goes to passing, maybe a little bit more than they did, just to kind of try to keep Minnesota off balance, because certainly, Minnesota's going to try to stack the box. I'm sure Michigan's going to test the middle of their defense early to see what they can do. And if they're running for 4 or 5 yards a carry, then they're just going to say, oh, we'll just do that and get out of here. And, they might do it all the way through the game if they can. But I would be interested to see if Michigan tries to just get Alex Orji a little bit more comfortable in the pass game. If Colston Loveland is back, they definitely will do that in preparation. Because I think that's the thing that's missing. When people say 32 yards, you're not going to win like that. Well, you had your best downfield threat out. I want to see them try to scheme some things for these receivers. I'm not saying that I want to see them passing all over the place. Would I be surprised if the ratio is a little bit higher passing compared to USC? No, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd actually probably expect that. I know people are sitting here saying Alex Orji can't throw. I just think that he hasn't. And there haven't been many opportunities. There have been some opportunities, but there haven't been many, and he hasn't had many opportunities as a quarterback to look downfield and try to make those throws at the college level, because he's only attempted, 20 passes so far in his career. I think he'll get about 20 attempts this game. Will it look much different than what Iowa did? I don't know that it will. I think it will look better, and I think it will continue to kind of look better as weeks go by, but I don't necessarily think that they're going to limit themselves fully. They just know that they don't have a lot of opportunities. They don't have a lot of receivers who have really shown a propensity to getting open and all of these things. But that's where you can scheme some guys. And I think that keeping things off balance by trying to just kind of expand upon what we saw last week against USC, because I do think that this is a prime opportunity to do that. So as far as this goes, I kind of looked around because I didn't really want to predict the score here. I think Michigan wins. I think Michigan probably even beats the spread, which is, I think, I'd have to look on FanDuel here. It's not huge. It's something like 8 or 9 or something like that at the moment. Let's look at that real fast if I can. No, they're going to do the thing where they make me sign in, but it's somewhere around the 8, 9, 10 mark. I know that much. I think Michigan will beat the spread. And I think that I think Michigan's going to continue to look crisp because they're going to be leaning into their identity. And I think that the big thing is just not having any mistakes. If you don't have any turnovers in any of the 4 games, these games look way different. They're kind of in 2019 territory because, why were they looking so sluggish and struggling so much in 2019? It was because they turned the ball over with impunity. with they were fumbling the ball every chance they got. So I want to see a clean game. Penalty wise, stay kind of where you were against USC. Maybe even clean up what little you had there, and just get to a point where you didn't turn the ball over, because that's what we're kind of used to seeing. Young teams tend to do that. So just try to figure out how you can take care of the football. I still think they will turn it over at least once. But I think that this game, some are saying more kind of in like the 21-14 type place. I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be like, I'm going to say 24-3, maybe 28-3. Let's say 28-3. That's what I'm going to go with. I don't think Minnesota is going to be able to move the ball on Michigan. I don't. And I think Michigan will probably get a defensive score or close to it, set them up to score. I think Michigan's going to lean into its identity, and I think it's just going to be a slow bludgeoning. And I think that they're going to do enough to keep Minnesota off balance and surprise them, whether it is through some horizontal passing game, and I think they'll hit a couple downfield shots. I'm even going to predict they're going to hit one big downfield shot. I'm talking like a 50-yarder. I think they'll hit one, and they're going to completely change the narrative as to how they can play. I don't think the passing yards are going to pass 100 still, regardless, but I do think that they'll get 200-plus yards rushing. So, and I think they'll get, like I said, a defensive turnover that will be key. So, all right, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back on Monday to discuss the game. Remember, check out the postcast. I believe that's an audio only with Jake Rietma. And we will talk again after this game as we prepare for Washington, getting to the midway part of the season, which is nuts. Hard to believe that that's where we're at already. It seems like the season literally just started. So we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. Peace.